Second Kings 11. This is a very interesting chapter um, that has, I think, a lot more implications than what you kind of sense on the surface. And so here, we'll just go ahead and read it. It's not a super long chapter. We'll read through it here. 2 Kings 11. It says, And when Athaliah, the mother of Ahaziah, saw that her son was dead, she arose and destroyed all the seed royal. But Jehosheba, the daughter of the king Joram, a sister of Ahaziah, took Joash, the son of Ahaziah, and stole him from among the king's sons which were slain. And they hid him, even him and his nurse, in the bedchamber from Athaliah, so that he was not slain. And he was with her, hid in the house of the Lord 6 years. And Athaliah did reign over the land. And the 7th year, Jehoiada sent and fetched the rulers over hundreds with the captains and the guard, and he brought them into the house of the Lord. And he made a covenant with them, and he took an oath of them in the house of the Lord, and showed them the king's son. And he commanded them, and he's saying, This is the thing that you shall do. A third part of you shall enter into the Sabbath, shall even be keepers of the watch of the king's house. A third part shall be at the gate of Sur, and a third part at the gate behind the guard. And so you shall keep the watch of the house, that it be not broken down. And 2 parts of all you that go forth on the Sabbath, even they shall keep the watch of the house of the Lord about the king. And you shall compass the king round about, every man with his weapons in his hand. And he that cometh within the ranges, let him be slain. And be you with the king as he goeth out and as he cometh in. And the captains over the hundreds did according to all the things that Jehoiada the priest commanded. And they took every man his men that were able to, or that were to come in on the Sabbath, with them that should go out on the Sabbath. And they came to Jehoiada the priest. And to the captains over the hundreds did the priests give the king David spears and shields that were in the temple of the Lord. And the guard stood, every man with his weapons in his hand, round about the king, from the right corner of the temple to the left corner of the temple, along by the altar in the temple. And he brought forth the king's son, and he put the crown upon him, and he gave him the testimony. And they made him king, and anointed him, and they clapped their hands, and they said, God save the king. And when Athaliah heard the noise of the guard and of the people, she came to the people into the temple of the Lord. And when she looked, behold, the king stood by a pillar, as the manner was, and the princes and the trumpeters by the king, and all the people of the land rejoiced. And they blew with trumpets, and Athaliah rent her clothes and cried, Treason, treason. But Jehoiada the priest commanded the captains of the hundreds and the officers of the host, and he said to them, Have her forth without the ranges, and him that kill with the sword. For the priest has said, Let her not be slain in the house of the Lord. And they laid hands on her, and she went by the way by the which the horses came into the king's house, and there she was slain. And Jehoiada made a covenant between the Lord and the king and the people, that they should be the Lord's people, between the king also and the people. And all the people of the land went into the house of Baal, and they broke it down, his altars and his images brake they in pieces thoroughly. And they slew Matan, the priest of Baal, before the altars. And the priests appointed officers over the house of the Lord. And he took the rulers over hundreds and the captains over the guard, and they took all the people of the land, and they brought down the king from the house of the Lord, and came by the way of the gate of the guard to the king's house, and he sat on the throne of the kings. And all the people of the land rejoiced, and the city was in quiet, and they slew Athaliah with the sword beside the king's house. 7 years old was Jehoash when he began to reign. So here we have Athaliah. Athaliah was the wife of King Joram. And so this kind of goes back a little ways. She was the wife of King Joram. She was the mother of King Ahaziah, the last 2 Judah kings. But more importantly, she was the daughter of Jezebel. And so if you remember, and it's been a long time since we talked about this, but back when Jehoram was ready to take a wife, his father reached out to Ahab and Jezebel, and they began to marry off their kids, Ahab and Jezebel's kids. Now we talked about this. More than likely, this was done for the purposes of political relations between North and South. They wanted there to be strong political ties, and we understand they are of the same nation. Yes, they were split at this particular point, but they're all the 12 tribes, and so there was some marriages there that took place for not just because one person loved that person. No, these were political marriages, and so they had implications. And we talked about this at the time. But what happened in Israel in the north through this particular marriage was brought down to the south. And we've talked several times already about this word, but there's this word influence. And that heavily relates to chapter 11 as well, because the influence of Athaliah didn't have anything really to do with Jehoram. It didn't have anything to do with Ahaziah. The influence of Athaliah came strictly from Ahab and Jezebel. And we see that really more towards the end of the chapter, but even what she does here at the beginning. And so and this is following on the hills, we had Jehu rise up. Jehu kills the kings of Israel and Judah, and he began to just wipe out the house of Ahab. And so Athaliah sees an opportunity here, just like I've done. And so she sees all this taking place, and she decides, hey, Judah is now without a king. Things are in unrest. And so she decides, well, I'm just going to make it so that nobody can make a claim but me. And so she wants to do to the house of David what Jehu did to the house of Ahab. She tries to wipe it out completely, and she was almost successful. And that's really the key in this chapter. She was almost successful. But the wicked deeds of this particular woman were thwarted by the bravery of another woman. And so verse 2, we are introduced to Jehosheba. And so Jehosheba here was the sister of Ahaziah. And we're not told this in this chapter, but in 2 Chronicles, we learn that she's the wife of Jehoiada, the man who plays prominently in the rest of the chapter. And so she is the sister of Ahaziah. As Athaliah is going and just killing all his heirs, everybody who could potentially make some kind of claim, she takes Joash, and Joash at the time is a baby. She takes Joash, she hides him away. Actually, what we learn is she hides him away in a closet, essentially in the temple, somewhere where she's fairly certain the queen's not going to go there. The queen's not going to find him. She hides Joash. She takes his nurse and she hides Joash and the nurse together so that he can be raised. And so what happens is nobody knows this. Her and her husband, as far as we know, Jehosheba and Jehoiada are the only ones who know that Joash is alive. And so for 6 years, not only Athaliah, but all of Judah thinks that she was successful. They think that she has successfully eliminated the line of David. And so for 6 years, she reigns solely as queen. She reigns as queen over Judah. And they basically, Jehosheba and Jehoiada, they're just waiting for the time where they can, they believe, successfully put Joash on the throne. Now, as I said at the beginning, we can't really overstate the importance of what she did. You may not sense it surface level. But Jehoshaba's actions here are incredibly important. It's not just that she saved the life of this boy, which she did, unquestionably she did, and through that act, saved likely the entire nation of Judah. But more importantly, she kept alive the promises of God. And this is what's the most important thing about this chapter. I'll quote Gaebelin here. He said, it was one of the many attempts Satan made to exterminate the male offspring, to make the coming one, the promised Savior, the seed of the woman, impossible. Had he succeeded through Athaliah in the destruction of the royal seed of David, the promise made to David would have become impossible. And so remember, this goes back to the promise that God made to David, that he would have an heir who would sit on the throne and reign forever, right? And so this was, if she had eliminated that line, obviously that had not yet taken place. Forever had not yet started. And so if she was to have successfully eliminated the line of David, the promises of God would have failed. And like I said, you have to imagine being a Judahite at this particular time, because for 6 years, they thought it had. For 6 years, they thought God's promise did fail. And so we can only imagine not only the things, we'll see this in a little bit, but the things that Athaliah was bringing into Judah, in conjunction with the fact that there was probably a whole lot of people questioning whether or not God was even real, whether or not he was all that they had thought he was. There was a lot of things taking place that kind of coalesced at this particular moment, where the nation of Judah was just rapidly declining, spiritually speaking. And so Joash, we'll see this more next week, but Joash comes in then at such a crucial juncture for the nation. Not only politically speaking, but much more importantly so, spiritually speaking. And if you understand kind of any of the history of Israel, you know that Joash was, he headed a lot of spiritual reforms. And he kind of brought Judah back from what was very likely a dark place, spiritually speaking. And so this one moment of bravery, and by the way, I'll add this, I don't think, and the text doesn't tell us this is my assumption, I don't think Jehosheba went and grabbed Joash and saved him because in her mind she was thinking, if I don't do this, God's promises have failed. I think in that moment she just thought, I have to protect this child. I think that's probably the only thing running through her head. But God was using the actions of this woman to bring to pass things that he had promised generations prior. And so this is just another example, whether or not we even realize it's happening, of the way that God can work through us to providentially bring to pass the things that he has promised to take place. And so very, very important things taking place here in the chapter. And so we move now to Jehoiada. And like I said, we're not told here, but we do read in 2 Chronicles that he is the husband of Jehoshaphat. He's also the high priest at the time. And so the time had come. Now, obviously, Joash is still very young. But I think it's pretty clear what's happening. The sooner they can get Athaliah off the throne, the better for Judah. And so, yes, he's young, and yes, he would need a significant amount of guidance and help along the way. But that's really where Jehoiada would kind of step up. And we will actually see him do that in this chapter. But they had to get her gone. And that was the impetus behind this. If all things were not as they were, yeah, they probably would have waited much longer time to make him kind of present himself and become king. But they didn't have that time, not with the things that she was doing. And so Jehoiada here, then he begins to gather together the captains, the guards. These were kind of two groups. These were kind of what we might call the temple guards. Remember, he's being raised there in the temple. These were kind of the temple guards. And also, these were a group of men. The Hebrew word there is Cherethites. And we won't go look at it, but in 2 Samuel chapter 8, that word there is used. The Cherethites is used to reference essentially David's bodyguards. And so the assumption here is that the group of men that he's talking to were essentially the king's bodyguards. And so these were, and with what happens, that makes a whole lot of sense. And so he takes all these people and he gathers them together, and then he reveals Joash to this particular group. And I cannot, this is one of those times you would love to have been there, right? You would love to have been a fly on the wall to see the looks on their faces as they understand, no, God's promises did not fail. We were just unaware of the fulfillment of them. And so here he presents Joash. You can just assume, I think rightfully so, the size of relief and probably the sobs that took place as people understood we're not just stuck with this ungodly queen. No, God had a plan all along. And so he reveals Joash again to the smaller group. But the hard part wasn't over yet. They still had to successfully and safely anoint him, publicly proclaim him, and make it so that Athaliah doesn't just come kill him like she did the rest of Ahaziah's family. And so then he begins to lay out a plan. Now I'm going to explain this because there's some difficulty in the wording here that some people get confused. And so he talks about there's a third of this group that's gonna guard the temple. There's a third of the group that's gonna guard the Sur Gate. There's a third of the group that's gonna come behind and kind of watch the rear guard of everybody. And then he says, and then another 2/3 are going to watch over the palace. Those numbers don't add up. So I want to explain what's happening here. Some people have given various explanations, but I think the one that is accurate is that there were a group of soldiers, I guess I'll say, captains, guards, that rotated. They were split into groups of 3. One group would watch over the temple and the palace for 1 week, while the other 2 were off for 2, right? And so they would rotate. Everybody would take a week, then you were off 2 weeks. And so when he splits a group into thirds, that particular group is the one who is on duty for that particular week. And so he says, y'all are going to be split. You watch this part, you watch this part, you watch this part. And then when he says the other 2/3, that would have been the other 2/3 of the group who were off duty. But Jehoiada says, not this week. No, you're working this week. And so he brings them on. And so that's why we can have what seems to be math that doesn't add up, but actually does when we look at it historically. Again, there are no errors. The author of Kings did not come up with a number that doesn't work. He gets it exactly right. And so he lays out the plan exactly, and all of it is to do this one thing. All of it is to protect Joash, right? That's what the whole plan was designed to do. And so they go into the armory that existed there at the time. They arm themselves well. In fact, it says that they take some of David's spears and shields, and they arm themselves properly. And it says, and the guard stood, every man with his weapons in his hand, round about the king, from the right corner of the temple to the left corner of the temple, along by the altar and the temple. They had everything covered. Again, the whole point of this was to not let the wicked queen go crazy again and go kill the line of David. And so it was at this point then that finally, and you can imagine the anticipation welling up within Jehoiada and Jehoshaphat. They've waited for years now as they've watched this boy grow up. I would assume that the text doesn't tell us, but I think it's safe to assume they've told him who he was. He knows who he's destined to become. He knows what awaits him, but yet he's still this little boy. But yet now, again, they feel like the time was right to remove her, to set him up as king, and to give him everything he needs to grow into that position and to be the king that Judah needs him to be. And so now they finally proclaim him publicly. They bring him out. They're at the temple. They bring him out. They put a crown upon him. It says that they anoint him. And most importantly, in particular for Joash, we're told specifically that they gave him the testimony. That's what the text says, that they gave him the testimony. And what that means is that literally is in reference to a copy of the law. They gave him a copy of God's law. If you go read through the Pentateuch in particular, several times you'll see the law referred to as a testimony. And so here they gave him the testimony. And so this was a copy of the law, which in fact was actually commanded in the law. If you go read there in Deuteronomy chapter 17, it talks about that you are to do this with kings. You give them the law. You teach them the law. Why? Because they would follow it and then become the example for the nation to follow, right? It was a top-down authority that they were supposed to exemplify what the law said. It says in chapter 17, verse 19, and it shall be with him, that's in reference to the law, and it shall be with him, the king, and he shall read therein all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear the Lord his God, to keep all the words of this law and these statutes to do them. That was the purpose of this. This is your guidebook. If you want to know what you're supposed to do as king, do this, right? Do this. Because more important, the king of it was supposed to be Israel, but now we've split. And so the king of Israel, the king of Judah, either one. The most important thing they could have done was not make savvy political moves. The most important thing they could have done was not to solidify their military, was not to make sure that they had the strongest border possible. All those are okay things to do as a king, but the most important thing that they were supposed to do as a king was to be a man of God. That's what they were supposed to do. They were supposed to follow the law, and unfortunately, we find that, at least in Israel, more often than not, that didn't take place. And so here Joash was handed this copy of the law, and we understand, like I said, we'll see this more as we go. But this would play an important role. Now, with the king in place, the people, they begin shouting. They're crying out, "God save the king!" And we can understand all manner of things are taking place. We'll see that more in just a second. But there's a lot of noise being made. That's kind of the point. A lot of noise being made. And so Athaliah hears this, and she decides to go see what's happening. And, obviously that's what would take place. So she comes down to the temple. And the text tells us as she gets there, she looks and says she sees the king standing by a pillar. And the text says, as the manner was. Essentially, he was positioned in a particular place and in a particular way that the kings typically did. He looked like the king. He was dressed like the king. He stood in the place of the king. That was enough for her to know exactly what had just taken place. Even if you didn't have all the fanfare going on, the fact that he was where he was, wearing what he was wearing, that was enough for her to know. But she sees this, and then added to that is all the fanfare. You have the princes, the trumpeters by the king, all the people of the land rejoice. They blew at the trumpets. All this is taking place. And so Athaliah says that she rents her clothes. She begins to cry out, treason, treason. Now, what is interesting is that she's crying out for treason when she's the one who killed everybody. She's the one who took the throne by force, and yet she's crying out against treason against the one who is the actual heir to the throne. But nevertheless, she's crying out treason, treason. And it's at this point that Jehoiada, he essentially, he tells his guys, he said, listen, I don't want this bloodshed in the temple. You take her out there and you kill her. And that's exactly what they do. They take her, they drag her out, and they have her executed. Now, with Athaliah gone, out of the picture, and again, Joash is only 7 years old, the people, whereas they're thrilled to have someone from the line of David, obviously they're not going to look to a 7-year-old, right? And so there's somebody else that's going to have to step up and take at least a role of leadership. And it was natural that it would fall to Jehoiada. Again, he's the high priest at the time. And so they begin to kind of look to him exactly what he should do. It says, and Jehoiada made a covenant between the Lord and the king and the people. And I think that's so important. He makes a covenant between the Lord and not just the people, but he includes Joash in this, right? Because you are the future leader of this people. Whether or not you're going to do it in earnest now, you are the leader of this people. So he makes a covenant between God, between the king, and between the people, that they should be the Lord's people, between the king also and the people. It says it again. It emphasizes that point for us. And so it's with this first step of renewed allegiance to God, they destroy Athaliah's legacy. Now, again, remember where she comes from. This is the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel. The thing that Ahab and Jezebel were known for more than anything else, beyond their wickedness, was the degree to which they brought in the worship of Baal in Israel. And so they brought in the worship of this false god to a degree in the north. And here their daughter begins to bring it into Judah. Now, it does not seem as if it was as successful in Judah as it was in Israel, but it had most definitely gained a foothold. And so, there's a place of worship here. There's priests actively working for this false god. And so what they do is they go exactly as Jehu did in Israel, and they destroy the house of Baal. They kill the priests of Baal. They go in and they just they destroy it. And again, this would have been Athaliah's legacy, as it would have been Ahab and Jezebel's in the north. Davis, he said, the sequence between verses 17 and 18 are important. So in 17 is when he makes the covenant. 18 is when they go destroy the temple. The sequence is important. Covenant leads to destruction. I think that's an interesting phrase. Covenant leads to destruction. If there is fidelity to Yahweh, all that attempts to sap and seduce that fidelity must be thrown down. When truth reigns, the false must be eliminated. And this is something that Christians today need to understand. There are so many Christians today who want the notoriety that they have to be one of tolerance. They want to be known for how tolerant they are of other people's thoughts and ideas and even religions and sexualities and all these things that exist today. But we don't see that in Scripture. What we see in Scripture is when God is actually worshiped as God, He has rules for how this world is to be governed. And we don't sit back and say, well, listen, I know that you like to do this other thing, and that's okay because we're all just reaching God in our own way. We're all just going to heaven in the way that we want to go. No, that's not how it works. And so here, God has a new king, and Jehoiada as the high priest rises up, and it says, if we're actually going to follow God, that cannot stay in our country. And that's exactly what I believe Christians need to stand up and make a stand today and say, and I'm not saying we have to do it in hateful ways. I'm not saying we have to do it in un-Christ-like ways, but there is a Christ-like way to demand that people are not allowed to be able to follow whatever hell-bound lifestyle they want to live. Because it's not for their good, right? People want to think, well, if I appear to be intolerant, I'm not showing love to them, and they're not going to come to Christ. No, what you're showing them is a false Christ. And the only thing you're leading them to is more deception. And that's certainly not Christ-like. And so exactly what happens here with Jehoiada and with the people of Judah is something I think needs to take place in our country at this exact time. And so, as we close out, the house of Baal is now destroyed. They return to the temple. They get Joash. They take him to the palace. They place him on the throne. And all the people, the text says, all the people of the land rejoiced, and the city was in quiet. They had peace. That's what it's telling us. At least for a brief amount of time, they had peace. And this would be the event. This would be the impetus for the fact that the southern kingdom of Judah would far outlast the northern kingdom of Israel. Right? The northern kingdom of Israel are just headlong into heresy and idolatry, and they will be conquered long before the nation of Judah would be. And this really is the reason why, because they had to return. I'll use his language. They had to return to covenant fidelity. And so Joash was not only the beginning of spiritual reform in Judah, but he was also a fulfillment of God's promise, what I referenced earlier. At a time when it seemed as though the promises of God had failed. And I can't emphasize that as enough. That's what people would have thought. At a time when it seems as though his promises had failed, God remained faithful to his word. And I want you to get this. Not because Judah deserved it. That's not why he did it. God did not keep Joash so that he could fulfill promises to David because the people of Judah deserved that goodness. He did it because he had promised it. And God is faithful to keep his word. And so I'll close here with Isaiah 55. For as the rain cometh down and the snow from heaven, and return not thither, but watereth the earth, maketh it bring forth in bud, that it may give seed to the sower and bread to the eater. He says, so shall my word be that goeth forth out of my mouth. It shall not return unto me void, but it shall accomplish that which I please, and it shall prosper in the thing whereto I sent it. And the people of Judah, they learned this lesson in earnest as they saw it physically upon the throne. But if you can't tell, I have loved this chapter. I just think it's wonderful to see how at times when we may think, oh, God, what are you going to do now? Everything seems like it's broken. How could you possibly work within this situation? Oh, we found out God was bringing the answer to this prayer 7 years ago. And so this was just a wonderful way to see God work here in the nation of